Listo. Muy buenas tardes y buenas noches con todos.
Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. We welcome you to this club, and we are very happy because we have an activity that of a sommelier that lives in Europe, and I'm going to tell you about him later. But first, I wanted to congratulate
De haber creado estos clubs. He conversado.
For working with these clubs. And
Están encantados.
We are very happy about this. Not only can we do networking, but also to talk to our friends and especially at a time when we need social distancing. Thank you, Elizabeth.
En el evento inaugural de ASIPI. En buena medida la forma en la que la asumimos. Y así lo estamos entendiendo muy bien los miembros del Club del Vino. En este club contamos con más de 30 miembros muy alegres y entusiastas, con los que incluso mantenemos un grupo de WhatsApp en el que compartimos día a día. Quiero también agradecer de una manera especial a Jorge Chávarro, el segundo vicepresidente de ASIPI, por haber apostado por este club. También es importante hacer un agradecimiento y un reconocimiento.
So Marcela Montañez, Executive Secretary of ASIPI, who helps us with the events, and especially today, she was solving some problems to be able to have this event. The Wine Club is planning to meet every 2 weeks to discuss issues about wine from different points of the world, and to invite guests that will teach us about this fascinating world, and to have virtual meetings, and to share a glass of wine with colleagues, and to discuss the denominations of origin and geographic denominations that are so closely linked to the names of the wines. Those of you who are using Zoom can use chat for the questions, and if you are using the other platform, you can use WhatsApp to send your questions to our guests, and you can also use the ASIPI platform. I want to especially, before we start, I want to thank our sponsors. These are, first of all, Clancy Intellectual Property from Canada, Paula Clancy, based in Canada, and Grunbaum and Posinas of Andrea and Leonardo Correa, who are based in Rio de Janeiro. So thank you too. So now let's get started with Burgundy, an icon that has inspired the world. Through a historic trip in Burgundy in France, we will see the different elements that have given rise to the terroir, to the identity. Burgundy is a very special place that century after century and day after day has led to the construction of winemaking at present. We will listen to chef and sommelier who's based in Lisbon, but that is of Colombian origin. We are speaking of Alejandro Chávarro. Alejandro, welcome. We'll tell you a bit about him. He began his studies at the School of Hospitality and Tourism in Biarritz in France, and he gave his first steps in restaurants and palaces with Michelin stars, such as Mascandi in Mougins, Monte Carlo Beach in Monaco, and the Hôtel du Cap Eden-Rock in Cap d'Antibes with Chef Hervé Busson. Passionate about the French service, and while he enjoyed his experiences in the kitchen, he was presented with opportunities to participate in a service contest. Hence, in 2009, he represented Colombia and won the World Maître d'Hôtel Championship in Zaragoza, Spain. This opened the doors of the Mugaritz restaurant in the Spanish Basque country, and there he joins the Roman sommeliers brigade led by head sommelier Linda Violago, who takes him into the world of food and wine pairings. He studied to be a sommelier at the School of Hotel Management in Nice, and then joined the Hôtel du Cap d'Enroc again, but this time as a sommelier already. He moved to Paris in October 2011 to direct the dining room and food and wine pairings of David Doutin's Agape Substance restaurant. At the Centerance restaurant in Paris, he delved into the exercise of pairing food and wine with chef Jérôme Banquetel. With his old partner, David Doutin, in 2013, he opened the doors of a restaurant in Paris, where they managed to obtain a star in the Michelin Guide in its first year of operation. After this great recognition, Alejandro took on a new challenge. And this is where Jérôme Banquetel, his former chef, called him to design the cava at the Hotel La Reserve. There was a technical problem, but I think I'm there. Can you hear me well? Good. So I was telling you that in Paris, he was in charge of the room in that restaurant, and he won 2 Michelin stars in just 2 months. In the meantime, there was a position, and Jérôme was very happy with the results that Gabriel obtained, and he encouraged him towards a new challenge together with Chef Pascal Barbon and Chef Christophe Roat at the Astrance restaurant, where he arrived in October 2015. So in 2020, he started working as chef and sommelier at the Aker restaurant in Lisbon, in Portugal, where he combines his activity with the wine trade, mainly organic wines between different European countries. So, and last but not least, that I didn't read of his resume, Alejandro is the son of our second vice president of ASIPI, Jorge Tabarro. So, Alejandro, thank you for devoting of your time, and good night in Lisbon. You have the floor. Well, thanks a lot, Alfonso, for this presentation, for this introduction that was quite comprehensive. And I also want to thank all of you for being present. It's a pleasure for me to be addressing you from Lisbon. Well, it's 9:50 p.m. and it's getting cold. So I decided to come to the restaurant to have a calmer atmosphere so that I can share with you this presentation. This is a building of the late 19th century. This made of stone and quite high ceilings. The reason, well, I'm a partner at this restaurant, and it's here that I work day in and day out. As Alfonso said, I had a very challenging time, but although it's not easy, I work every day very hard. So first of all, I imagine that some of you may have gotten a bottle of wine, or in a way you obtain some Burgundy. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be Burgundy. It can be some other strain. But it would be wonderful if you could have a glass of wine so that we can taste the first glass and celebrate that we are all together. And I'd like to have a toast celebrating the pleasure of being with you. This is a white Burgundy wine for this first toast. So, cheers. Let's then get into our topic. Burgundy. Burgundy is a fascinating region full of traditions and a lot of contents. And I'm increasingly learning about the complexity of the region that has led to make worldwide famous wines. 2.5 hours from Paris by train, and about 3 hours to Chablis, the red dot there in the map, and about 3.5 hours or 3:40 to get to Dijon. That is the initial part of this trip. This is about 250 kilometers from Dijon to the south in Macon, about 27,000 hectares of plantations. This is a mythic region, not only because of its location, but because of everything that happened for many, many years. And it is that we'll see little by little. Alejandro Chavaro, well, Alfonso gave you an idea of who I am. And so go to your bottles, and if you have any questions concerning the label, the names, the domain, try to write down those questions because we'll have a chance to answer them. So Burgundy is a complex region. There's a lot of information linked to the geographic origin, and this is divided into two parts, one that is very large and then another smaller one. To the left on the map you have Chablis, that is in the north of Burgundy, and it's very close to Champagne. The climate is a bit colder, and the soil is more calcareous, and we'll have a big difference with the north of the Côte de Nuit. So this is a department that is called Côte d'Or, and along this line we'll see different côtes, coasts. We'll take the highway that takes us there, and little by little we'll see the different parts. In the Côte de Nuit we have the many then we have the Côte de Beaune, and at the end we'll end up in Marange and Bouzeron, and from there to the south the soil will differ a lot, and we'll have Mercurey and Givry and Montagny, and then Mancé, and so we'll finish in Tourneux. And so we'll have a chance to see all the structure of Burgundy. So today we are going to, the part where there's more historical information is the north, the Côte de Nuit, because it was there that most there are two very important elements that I'm going to address. So in your glasses, the advantage of Burgundy is that there are two strains actually that can be shared, but especially in white wines we have Chardonnay, that is most of the white wines in Burgundy, and the red wine is the Pinot Noir, the icon of Burgundy. These are the two strains that will be the most important in red, in wine, and white. In white, we will use the denomination of origin, aligoté. In Bougeron, where we will have the possibility of having mostly aligoté. And in the red wines, we'll have a possibility not just to have Pinot Noir, but the Pinot Noir mixed at different proportions, 80% Pinot Noir and 20% Gamay. And there we'll be able to use Pinot Noir and Gamay. Gamay is a strain that is found in different parts of Burgundy, but it is not very popular now. But it is used especially at the south of Burgundy with the Beaujolais. And after the second region, the strain that is the most important part of Beaujolais. So we have Pinot Noir in the south, and today we are mostly going to talk about Chardonnay. So this is not just popular in Burgundy, but throughout the world. So let me tell you some of the history, and I won't give you too many details because it's rather complex. We need to take into account, first of all, an essential fact. Burgundy developed and became in the beginning of the Middle Ages. So from the year 400 to the 1800s, that's a very, very long period. And there is a succession of characters that will lead to the development of Burgundy. So the first written records are correspond to 312, but the boom of Burgundy will be the installation of two congregations. Burgundy is in the north of the Rhone valley, that goes from Marseille up to the north to Burgundy, and the Romans came through this passage. There was water there that made it easier for them to travel. It comes from Italy and from France. It connected to the Rhone Valley and taking them to the north. So they get along the way they created towns and hamlets, and when the congregations of monks install, they plant for food, crops for food, and they create the table wine or the mass wine. So two very important congregations settled in Burgundy. The Cistercians to the north of the northern Nuit, and the Clunisians in the south of Mâcon. And the Cistercians and the Clunisians were very important because what do the monks do every day? Well, praying and working. When they pray, and that's part of their activity, but working, it's increasingly demanding for them. At a time, Bernard de Clairvaux, that is one of the characters that is played a key role here, issued a decree stating that all the monks need to pray, but they need to work as a form of prayer. So the monks have time. It's not like we regular people that are constantly running. They have time, and they have time for observation. So what they do is they start settling in different parts, and they start planting, but not randomly. They start trying to understand the different types of soils, of the locations, the influence of the water, if there are rivers, if there are water flows to provide some humidity. And that taught them how to plant the strains that they carried. They start to plant Chardonnay, and different varieties that little by little will evolve, and the Piofa, that is a different strain. And from then on, what do they do for a long, long time? They plant and they make mistakes. They plant and they get good yields. So we need to consider that here we only have one harvest yearly. It's not like what happens in Latin America with different climates, so that you may have 2 seasons in 1 year. So, but here, once a year, usually September, October, they have the harvest, and there they'll see the fruits of the work.
So they start to check where it works and where it doesn't. And that brings understanding geographically and from the climate perspective of what it means to plant. That is not just the elements, but it's the way in which they work. So from Vision, there is a road, an old road that starts to develop and starts to go around and through all of these little villages and to Pomar, Volmet, and it continues all along these villages. It's interesting to mention that this road leads to 2 things. From north to south, on the right, we're going to have hills, and on the left, plains. So on the left, we can plant vegetables, agriculture, food, and when we start to have the hills, we will have more sun. It will be sunnier and windier, so that will change the landscape, and we will be able to have micro areas with different climates and different intensities. There, they started to develop in the vineyards, the concept of vineyard, and they started to develop the clos. This word is, maybe you've heard about this, maybe you saw it on a label. The clos is, for them, it has been the concept of closing in a box, to close a certain space so that they can fully understand that space. So in those small spaces, they can say how the climate works in the different spaces. And little by little, they divided those spaces and named them. They built the spaces, they built the walls in stone, they managed the water, and they managed the diversity of soils to receive different feed. So that gave birth to the identities that we know today, because the clos that were created at that time still exist today. So all of these clos are today included on the labels of our wines. For example, this bottle is Clos de Seine. Why is it called like this? Because the Clos de Seine has the north part of the soil, because there were 4 trees that were planted, and they saw that in the lower plains this worked better than in the higher parts. This took a lot of time and effort to understand that what the places bring and what is specific about these places. Another interesting notion that was developed later in history is the concept that for us is new. They were the first ones to start to write and to record, to log somehow everything that they were doing. So they explained to people the different parts of the year, moments of the year where things worked. When they created this very, very rich information, they also created the notion of clima or climate that is it's a word in French that means the climate, but the weather, but it also means what the weather is going to do. For them, the clima, it is the climate conditions, it is the place, it is the land, and it is the economic effort. So on a certain year, I'm going to produce some crops and at a certain cost. And this is something that up to now, it has not changed. So when we speak of history, we talk about the main personalities that led to the wine as we know it today. We can talk about many of them, but mainly we need to understand why the Bourgogne wine has developed as it has and what is the value that it has had. Philippe Lardy was the ambassador of Bourgogne, and the Duke that from Dijon, that was the house of the Bourgogne Dukes, started to put Bourgogne wines on the table. And the French crown at that time had enormous influence in Europe. So little by little, they started to spread the wine because the different leaders of the rest of Europe started to taste it. And of course, it started to spread. So increasingly, they developed this image that enabled them to position the brand as an exclusive brand that that required recognition. So the Bourgogne dukes spread the wine to the rest of the world, and because this was very close to Paris, then this enabled them to export it as well. So, of course, many years have passed in all of this period, but in the meantime, the wine developed, and in those in the 250 kilometers of this road, in the monarchic area times, they developed, it became the regular work for them. It was the regular source of income. Then, of course, during the French Revolution, this ended and it was expropriated. And this is how the monks had to leave their land. The Bourgogne families had to leave. They started to have new people started to come. So the present Burgundy was created somehow. What the monks had done was then passed on to the common people. It was divided into families, and they were divided into a wide range of products among brothers, cousins, and relatives. So the idea then brings us to a concept. The concept is, maybe you've heard about this concept. This is the concept of the terroir. This is a notion that enables us to describe in a simpler way what it's represented by a specific geographical place, but it's not just a place. It is what the OIV, the International Wine Organization, classifies as a term that has evolved over time, of course, and that has had a greater impact globally, and the different places in the world have defined their specificities in terms of terroir. And for example, in Australia, in the Netherlands, in Spain and Portugal, they also developed this concept. The concept is a space that has knowledge interaction with the physical environment and practices that produce an outcome. I like the symbols to be able to understand things myself. If this had been made in the Middle Ages, the human beings would be in the middle. But now this has a different format with the earth in the middle. And what is the interaction? Then you have the land, you have the types of grapes that would be the vehicles that will teach us what we're drinking, the human being, and the climate. The human being will be the one that will enable the transformation of the matter from a solid into a liquid. And that will enable you to reflect philosophically about this transformation from the solid into the liquid and what that represents. This would be another talk in itself. This in a simpler environment, but now the idea would be to emphasize the interaction. This land that we're talking about, this terroir, is land, but especially its soil. Because in Burgundy, what is important for them is the soil. So from north to south, they have divided the soil and they opened wells to see how the different soils interacted and how they were similar or different and what results they would produce. This is essential. Many books have been written about this. Here you can see lots of different sites being described with lots of measures describing the soil and to see how so many differences can exist in one within one population. It would be very interesting for us to see the different terroirs based on how they have been described. So what happens? We found many different things. We had different origin, 84 different origin denominations. We have some regional ones. And if we think of this concept of the triangle, we have the regional Burgundy. And in each one of the parts of Burgundy, you can do this. And then you have the villages, village. This would be a village, and the different villages in Burgundy. And then we have to classify the premier co and grand co. That would be like a piece of land that I will show you now what it looks like in the lower part and the central part, and you will see how both interact, but you will not see that in all the villages, and you will not see that in all the kinds of soil. So here you will see this great diversity. There will be about 562 different names of possible grapes in Burgundy. This is insane. It has when we buy wine, this is very difficult to decide because not only we will have a terroir of the different areas, but this you could have it in one village or in different ones. And when we speak of curiosities, there's something very interesting about the names. A piece of land, a very small piece of land, can produce an origin denomination, and it could be very small, or it could be just the property of one person, and this little, it could be just the property of one person, and this property would be a denomination in itself, and that would be transferred to a bottle. This will become a bottle. So here you have two different examples. That is the Romane Conti. These are two different parcels, one next to each other. You can see them here. And here you can see this is in the middle. The Romane will be the one on top, and the Romane Conti will be at the bottom. So it's not a perfect square, of course, because the Romane that is on at the top is the property of Louis Michel de Chevalier. He's a friend of ours that took a former plantation that had been in the family since the 1800s, and then came into the family. They never developed the final wine, and they started to develop it as of 1990. This is horizontal, but when you go to the Romane Conti, that is the lower parcel, there is a little pathway from one parcel to the other, and the Romane Conti starts with a vertical disposition. Within 1.5 hectares, one is planted horizontally and the other vertically, because the soil is different, because the inclination is different. And what you see here is fantastic, because you have two completely different wines that will be very different, because one is close to the other, not because they're close, but because each one of them will develop and each one of the owners will develop his or her own wines. If we speak of this part of the Romane, we will speak of the smallest terroir that exists is 0.84 hectares. There's nothing smaller than this, and this generates just one bottle, and the prices are high, and especially very difficult to get. This generates the huge Burgundy variety today. These are unique terroirs produced by one or more people, and you will only find in that area, and they would be bottled once a year only.
So this iconic idea of Burgundy comes from that history. Now, recently we talked about the Burgundy label. I'm sure Aulnay, Fligny, Chassagne, Norceau, depending on what you found, it could also be Bourgogne. It's important to consider how to read the label, because the labels can be very confusing and difficult to understand. So what is the most interesting thing? The initial part. What denomination of origin? Is it Chablis Premier Cru, as you have here? Here you have Chenier Le Bon. Now we are in the Premier Cru. And Le Montmain will be one small plot in Premier Cru, and among the Chablis, it's this is one in Chablis. So the complexity is to read the most essential things on the label. So what's the denomination of origin? Then the plot, the terroir, and then the most important thing in Burgundy, that it is who's the winemaker. But in places like Louis Saint-Georges, there may be from 1 to 80 winemakers working on the same plot, the same terroir, and the 80 bottles will be different. So it's passion. It's fascinating because for us it's difficult. We go tasting from one place to the other, and we see an identity of Chablis here, an identity of Chablis here, and they will all differ. So it's fascinating to talk to people and to understand what their job is, and what their craft is, to understand the way they see it and the winemaking technique that they use. All that in addition to the year, the harvest, because this is something that is of key importance. Whenever we taste one of these wines that are wonderful, sometimes not so good, sometimes so, because in Burgundy there may be wines that are not so wonderful, but we'll detect the identity. And for instance, in 2008, this was an excellent year for the white wines, and 2002 was excellent for the white wines. 2015 was wonderful for the red. In 2017, wonderful year for both. So the complexity here is which, if increasingly we want to understand how this works, we need first to take 1 second and to taste a second glass. And we already have about, we've been talking for 40 minutes, and I'd like you to check the time, to take some time to feel the glass. And if you have a Chardonnay or a Pinot, but especially remember what you felt when we tasted when we had the first toast and now, because the air, as for us, or an apple or whatever, has an impact. And especially when, as soon as we open the bottle, it's like getting up in the morning. The way we take that, sometimes we serve it, we pour it very, very mildly soft. We try to do it with great care. And you need to, and so you see how wine differs and how it changes because of the action of air. Maybe some of you felt a big difference between the wine that you tasted 40 minutes ago and what it is now exposed. In that Pinot, there was a lot of fresh fruit, a bit acidic, and with some, and now it's more pleasant. The acidity is more balanced, and that fruit flavor. Now we'll smell different odors. What will be the difference between the different plots, the different terroirs? Well, it will depend if the plot is here, is in the different times of the year, they will have different wines. So whenever we open a Burgundy bottle, we need to consider that it is important for us to get ready for this. This morning, Jacques Fusset, who was a key person, died. He was 93 years old, and he taught us that the most important thing is to learn and to make ourselves accountable of our flavor, when as a Colombian, I went to France and I had absolutely no idea of all this, because in Colombia there's no such thing. But when I tasted it here, I started learning. But it all depends on how ripe it is, or so. All this is, you need curiosity and to drink slowly with time. And when we speak of tasting, there's something essential in the world of wine, and the casque du vin, the cask of wine, is a container mostly made of silver that was used in the past. The monks used it when they opened the vats, the wine vats, the barrels, to see the color and to taste it. But they don't do it the way we do it now, that we use the nez. We feel the fragrance. No, they would taste it with their mouth, and they called it cask de vin. So in the next slide, please, you have to cutter the vin, le vin. That is, taste the wine, try to chew it, and you'll see that the result will be completely different at when you just taste it with your tongue and then wait for a while. This is something that you can see with all the products, but especially with wine, it is absolutely important. Of course, there's no need to make such a noise. It's a bit strange. Leave that to enologists, because they need to do that to see the differences and the mistakes. So we taste the wine with our mouth, and for me, it's the first step to learn. So, and there you define whether you like it or not, whether you like this one or this one. So, speaking of Cat de Vin, I wanted to thank and pay tribute to this gentleman, Peter Dirk Simpson. Some of you may know him a lot, but he was a very peculiar character, because I had heard about him in Burgundy by winemakers. When I was in one of the trips and I heard for the first time talking about this, and well, we he started telling us the history. He exported wines to Brazil, and Peter Dirk was he was kind enough to go with me to the different restaurants where I worked. We know that he is renowned as a wine taster, and it was wonderful to be visited by him. He worked a lot with the Burgundy wine, because sometimes when things come from outside, people don't like them so much, because the local people tend to say, we do it best. But he learned about this, and he created some time to share it with the other side of the Atlantic. So this gave us a possibility with all the wine makers. I was fortunate to find Peter in many different places, and we shared many stories. And he made me a better professional for this, and a transmission of a place. Be willing to open a bottle of wine and sharing it. And I always remember that whenever we opened a bottle of Burgundy at a restaurant, he was always nice and said, open it, pour some into your glass, and drink it slowly as the night proceeds. So Peter really left his footprints. Never did I meet anybody as passionate as he was in the world about this. And he was wonderful to convey the pleasure of wine tasting. So my toast for cheers for better. Cheers to all and including better. Thank you, Alejandro, for that tribute. It's been a huge pleasure, really. So, after this happiness, let's go on with a bit more happiness because I'll speak of love. Because it's the most interesting thing about this. Wine may be very choosy, like for an elite. It's happened to me often, and I wasn't born in an area where they made wine, but I got educated in the land of wine. And it's interesting to consider that Burgundy, in all my trips, has given me something very important. It has helped me understand people, understand human beings that are absolutely passionate about this work. And from generation to generation, they transmit the story of or the specificities of each plot, of each terroir. In the last and the next, well, because from the late 1800s to today, we need to know the histories and to understand the legacies, and especially in a year like this, it's important to see that winemaking will never stop. But it is important that year after year, the vineyards continue to develop, but especially the person that works with it will teach us about that harvest. To give you an example, maybe we could bet the results of the 2020 harvest that I participated in this year, because in every year that have been difficult for mankind, including some years in the 40s, 47, 48, 49, and others, the results of the wine obtained was wonderful. So sometimes when mankind is experiencing very severe situations, wine was there to comfort them. And the results that we obtained this year, and what I understood of this year, was it was the earliest harvest, but very interesting, and especially with a surprise in the balance of all this. So why did Burgundy bring all this? Well, just because this is a region that from north to south gathers generosity, knowledge, understanding, humbleness, because not only can you do things right, but so there are years like 2016 or 2012 where you lose 30, 40, 60% of your harvest. Why? Because of nature. So if man is not humble enough and understand that not everything can be controlled, unless you won't accept all this. And this is something that happens even today as we speak. We need to be humble. And it's the winemakers and the owners of the vineyards that have explained this to me. It's important to cultivate the soil, but in a conscious manner, being aware. And whenever I go to Burgundy, I see this. And the most interesting thing is that the people are devoting increasingly to work in the fertility of soils and to make it possible to improve biodiversity. I imagine that you'll see biodiversity, agroforestry, permaculture. There are many new practices that are aimed at creating more biodiversity and to attract all the pieces of nature that will give us better ecosystems, because each of them has a role to play that is key in this practice, and that yield better and better results, especially for today, tomorrow, and the day after. Never had I understood this until I had a daughter, in my case. This was the analogy that winemakers have. If you start thinking, what is a vat? A cask. It's a sort of, it's like an egg, but we cut the edges so that we can roll it. And that is why the vats, the barrels have that shape. So, but we wait an hour, a complete year to bring the harvest to our cellars, and the wine will ferment and will transform something solid to something fluid, and that will give rise to a new life. And as the monks in the Middle Ages will wait for 9 months or 1 year before pouring it into a bottle. And what was the term that they used? It's belching. It's to help the wine ripen, and so until you can put it into a bottle. So the monks, even if they never had children, well, most of them at least didn't have children, they developed what we already know now: the timing, the space, and how these things get done to have a final output that when you put it into a bottle is because the time has come to take it to the real world. One of the things that I like to do was to see more and more, and I imagine that for many of you, we see increasingly that in the Burgundy there are new farmers. Many of them are very young, and they are recovering new identities, but they are not really new. They are old. They are selecting from the different varieties to maintain what they always had and not to lose the DNA, not to lose what they already had. So let's see, I'll leave you with with this idea of the pairing. In Burgundy, well, you have white and red, and with an aligoté, for instance, or a chablis, a petit chablis. So unless if it's vinegars and salty things and vegetables, the Chardonnay, you can drink it with very salty things. Many of you have, but we also have with seafood, but we also have fatty material with butter. This has much more volume, so we'll be able to look for more generous recipes. And this fat that we'll have in the mouth will for instance, a bowl of bread, cream, and mushroom, natural balance and symbiosis. So Pinot is multifacetic, and light goes through it. It can come with proteins. We can drink it with proteins, with vegetables, with a barbecue. Based on indication, La Côte de Nuit gives us more refreshing, and La Côte de Bon, it's more. It has more clay, more dense wines for recipes with sauce, with more butter. And in Bourgogne, I always cook the boeuf bourguignon, and it takes 3 days to prepare it, but it's wonderful. So I've talked for 50 minutes. So now I give the floor. Alejandro, you were wonderful. What you make me jealous. Do you know why? Why? Because we started the wine club very strongly, and I think that today we are creating the fan club of Alejandro Chavero. You don't know how many messages that that we got. People loved not just all your knowledge, but also how passionately you speak. So we in 2021 we want to hear you further and continue to share. There are some questions, but I think the platform will be closed very soon because we are running out of time. But very briefly, if we have enough time, there were some questions. Cecilia Francolino asked, for instance, let me see. Do you think that France is the country with more denominations of origin of wine? Do you think that France is a country that has more wine denominations of origin? Well, I don't have it here in the tip of my tongue, but given what I know, just thinking of Bordeaux and Burgundy, there's no doubt. I would say, indeed, yes. My apologies, but I'm passionate about Alejandro Chavero. So, and I want to ask him, why is it that the Beaujolais has become so popular? Is it from Bordeaux or not? Because I had a dinner at the French Chamber of Commerce, and they offered that, saying that it was the season. Well, we speak of Beaujolais when we speak of Gamay. Beaujolais is the region just to the south of Burgundy. About 30 years ago, there was an entrepreneur created this with the assistance of the French government, because the region was going out of business. So they used all the embassies across the world. They created a party that is the Fête de Beaujolais. And when the winemakers make wine, after 9 months, they like to open bottles to share among their friends, and they thought that it would be good to spread it all over the world with young wines to promote the consumption of wine. And so annually there's a rendezvous to drink wine. Well, we are told that they won't interrupt us. So it's the evening in Lisbon. No, the children are sleeping, no problem. Ramiro wanted to ask something. Ramiro? I'm a winemaker here in Bolivia. We have a boutique winery in the border with Argentina. First of all, let me congratulate you, because this is the first time that I hear such a clear explanation, such a clear account about the French wine. I think that many of us didn't know about French wine. Usually in South America, you know about Chilean and Argentine wines, and then you go to Spain or the Napa Valley, and then a bit more France, we tend to see it as very distant. But I liked your explanations, and I have two questions. The first is, to what extent is it compatible to be a sommelier and an enologist? Are they close cousins? Because enology today is already more similar to engineering, and being a sommelier, that's absolutely different, but I think that they complement each other. So how can is it consistent to be an enologist and a sommelier? Have you heard about the white wines, especially in Bolivia and the north of Argentina? But congratulations, because you taught us about the French wine. So thank you. Somebody said that the apple never falls far from the tree. So my greetings and congratulations to the speaker. Yes, a very special. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alejandro, because you taught us a lot today. Thank you. So now let's no longer share the screen. Even if Jorge, even if your son is an expert, now the wine club will have to listen to you, because I'm sure that you know a lot about it. I think that you are too shy. Well, wherever they take it. Well, France is not a bad choice.
Ya que tenemos gran parte del comité ejecutivo aquí, ¿por qué no tiramos una moción de cambiar el próximo ASIPI de Punta Cana para París? O sea, yo creo que aquí podemos hacer un consenso.
Eso sería buenísimo.
Ya que lo ha aprobado.
Además, vino podemos tomar todos, eso no es ningún problema.
A chiquita en París está más cerca.
Y como hay jornadas en Sucre, pues vamos donde Moreno, para que nos guarde unas cajitas.
Seguimos en Punta Cana bebiendo los vinos franceses también.
Él iba a tener que hacer un encargo de vinos franceses para Punta Cana.
Eso, ahí está bueno.
Ahí está, esa es la nueva misión de Pino.
Lo importante es que haya un vino independiente donde vayamos, me parece.
Bueno, mucha organización.
Alejandro, tal vez para
experimentamos el vino de Bolivia, así tomamos en Punta Cana.
Eso.
Me parece.
Bueno, ahí tenías las preguntas de Ramiro, y hay un par de personas que quieren preguntar, pero dale con las respuestas a Ramiro.
Vale, entonces, en relación con estas dos preguntas, comenzando por la que son...
Well, about that question about being a sommelier and an enologist, it's completely different. An enologist is like a chef. He's the person who creates. It's a different thing. And in terms of studies, it's very demanding, but especially technically. Yet, what I saw all those years is that by traveling many, many times and with very strong relations with the winemakers, of course, there's something very interesting, and it is that here, for instance, in Portugal or in Burgundy or in the Loire or in Hungary, for instance, there's a very simple vision. Winemaking was developed by monks that were not scientists. They were good observers of and many of the big winemakers, the winemaker is the one that will make the wines. Today, the enologist is key. I would say that it's like a financial advisor that helps you. But I've seen sommeliers that have become winemakers because they want, I wouldn't care. I prefer to live in the restaurants because it's what I know how to do. But if any day I had to do it, it would be possible. And many of the winemakers never went to school, and the wines are absolutely wonderful. And that's the most interesting thing, is that instinct and the way humans get captivated by nature make them wise in winemaking. That's the reality. But the white wines, I heard you speak, and I heard you about the white wines in Bolivia. I didn't know anybody there. You are the first in Argentina. I knew this. I worked with some wines in Argentina as white wines. There's a winery that is very interesting, and in Chile too, in different regions. Well, so far, what I get here in Europe is very little. It's very little because the imports is difficult, especially the concept. Our concept here with winemaking, Latin American winemaking especially, we only get a few bottles, not many, but there are. And we tasted white Chardonnay and of different latitudes, and it's been fantastic. Understanding that it's possible to do this, and that there's a wonderful level in Latin America. Absolutely fantastic. Yes, we'll invite you in January, February, the Bolivian wines. Wonderful. I have a lot to learn. Before we go, some people were not here at the beginning. We need to thank our sponsors, Paula Clancy from Canada, and Brown and Leonardo Cordeiro in Brazil. So thank you for your support. I understand that Rodolfo Martinez wanted to ask a question. Rodolfo, did you want to ask a question? Rodolfo? Fernando Triana? Rodolfo, you've been muted. Rodolfo? We can't hear you. He doesn't have a mic. Fernando Triana, a friend from Bogota, also had a question, but I lost it in the chat. Are you there? Yes. In closing, before the question, Ramiro, send us some bottles. And send us some white wine and some altitude. 0.8 hectares, as you told us. How many bottles do they get in a typical harvest? Not many. The last one in 2019, in late August, the total production was 3 barrels. If you put everything in the bottles, the most that I've seen, 1,800 bottles when they have a very high yields. But with the latest, 2-3 barrels. So you don't get too much. If you get over 1,200, it's maximum. So how can you make reservations and get any of them? It's difficult. And in a Burgundy, the peculiarity about Burgundy, and the chateau don't reserve them. I imagine that you can get them because you